and welcome to the Debrief. I'm Donna King, Editor-in-Chief of Carolina Journal. We're going to be talking about lots of things going on this week. Thanks for joining us. Of course, we have David Larson, CJ's Managing Editor, and he runs all the columns and all the great things that you read on carolinajournal.com. Also, and of course, Katie Zender, who covers our ag, tariffs, lots of commerce, everything you need to know about running business here in North Carolina. Okay, this week we're talking about college polling sites. Katie, you had a great article on that. Why is this becoming a flashpoint here in 2026 as we go into the elections? Plus, the broader kind of demographic shifts that we're seeing in North Carolina. Who's moving in? What do they believe? Are they bringing their politics with them? That's something we're going to be talking a lot about. We want to hear from you. Let us know what you think in the comments, or certainly reach out to editor at Carolina Journal and let us know. Plus, property taxes. Are they going through the roof? Mine are, certainly. We're going to be talking about that. But first, I want to dig into the trade deficit. This is something you've been covering a lot of here, and it looks like our overall trade deficit, and new reports just out this week, it's roughly unchanged, even though we're seeing a lot of tariffs. Trade deficit is now over $900 billion. But what does this mean for North Carolina? You've done a lot talking about tariffs. It seems like tobacco exports are continuing to decline in our trade with China. What are you hearing about the impact of tariffs and some of this focus on the trade deficit here in North Carolina?
Right. So, Donna, I've done a lot of work over this on the last year. And you're right. This has a huge impact on North Carolina industries because several of North Carolina's primary industries, including agriculture, are significantly impacted by these tariffs. And so, you're right, tobacco exports are down. Farmers are really feeling that effect in eastern North Carolina, where there's a lot of the tobacco farmers. And then we're seeing, pharmaceutical and capital goods are remaining strong, nationally, and that's a huge industry here in North Carolina as well. So we are seeing the impacts of that. Ag is the number one industry here in North Carolina. So we've got tobacco, we've got pork, we've got poultry, we've got sweet potatoes, we've got all of these industries and little sectors of these industries that are being significantly impacted by these
really squeezed. Like you spent some time at a sawmill in North Carolina that's feeling it.
Yeah, so there was a sawmill in eastern North Carolina near the border that was actually shut down because of the tariffs, and it was a really sad story because it was like sixth generation sawmill, and this guy had to shut down, put 50 people out of work. He does have another operation in Elizabeth City, so a lot of those people had the option to go there if they wanted to. But he had huge exports to Asia, China, all of these different industries. But because of the tariffs, he had to close his sawmill back in July. And so we went out there in September and told his whole story. And it's a really sad story.
Absolutely. What's his name?
Wilson Jones.
Okay, Wilson Jones. Let's take a look. So Jacob Evans here at Carolina Journal and Katie work together. And we wanted to show you a little bit about what they're experiencing.
My brother and I are sixth generation lumbermen, and our business goes back to 1882. Liberation Day has taken my business, my personal investment, and I'm not talking about money, because I can think any independent lumberman would tell you that they are not in this industry to make money, but they're in it because they love it. But it's taken 38 years of my time, effort, life, inside and outside from me. It's taken a business that I enjoyed. I do love the industry. And it's taken from me, probably on a more personal level than anything, the privilege. And it's truly been a privilege to work with these guys.
If you could give a message to President Trump about how his tariff policies have impacted you and your company, what would you say?
I would ask him to genuinely come down here and look, and don't just make blanket edicts because that's the edict of the day. Everything we do affects somebody. It's little teeny guys in steel-toed shoes and blue jeans and t-shirts. We were the guys. We were the people that were keeping this trade deficit. We were the ones who were keeping it down. Yeah, we're a bunch of sawmill guys. They're guys that are cold in the wintertime and sweaty and dusty in the summertime. And they worked every single day.
Are you going to be covering more of that?
Yeah, so we're going to be getting more into that in the next couple of months. We're going to be talking with Robert Luddy of Captive Air Systems. We're going to be talking with people from, agriculture, people from biotech, people from pharmaceuticals, and really finding more stories like Wilson Jones and how they're actually having an impact on industries, on day-to-day lives, on ordinary people, ordinary businesses, big businesses in North Carolina.
Sure, David, this is a big issue, but how do you thread this needle politically? Because, it's popular among Republicans. Whatever's coming out of the White House is popular when we talk about tariffs because it's a fundamental fairness issue, right?
I think the president's done a good job of making trade deficit sound. It sounds like a bad thing.
Sure, deficit is bad,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, deficit is bad, and so in his first term, some of his economic advisors kept coming in and saying, actually, it's really not a big deal to have a trade deficit.
I don't have a deficit with Harris Teeter, right? Because I buy all my groceries there.
The point they would make to him is, and Mitch Kokai has a good piece that kind of laid this out, that traditionally, if you have a trade deficit with a country, often that means you're wealthier than them.
Right.
And so you have more money than them, and you can buy their things more than they can buy your things.
Sure.
And so it's really not a big deal for the wealthiest countries. They tend to have trade deficits with the poorest countries.
Right.
Because they don't have the things that we produce are often services in technology and finance and all of these things that people, pretty poor people in Vietnam are not going to be spending a lot of money on.
Right.
Whereas, we're going to buy a lot of things from manufacturing. I think that's part of it, is the manufacturing part of it.
Sure.
Where some of that trade deficit has come from, we have a lot more efficient manufacturing now, but some of the less advanced manufacturing things that we used to produce here maybe are now in other countries.
Right.
Our output has actually gone up by a lot. It's
Sure.
just that we have fewer people doing those manufacturing jobs. And, there are actually openings in these industries.
Sure.
The National Association of Manufacturers, I believe is what it's called, had a their annual meeting in Cary a couple years ago. And they're talking about the biggest problem is we have plenty of jobs, but people don't want to do these jobs.
Right.
So bringing more jobs, like trying to fight the this trade deficit and bring these jobs back over, if that's the mindset, we don't really have the people beating down the doors to the jobs that are available now.
Right.
So that's part of the problem. And then some of these things that we're creating by sort of pushing back against some of the free trade things that we've put in place, these agreements.
Sure.
Some of these countries, if we kind of wrestle some of these things back, then there's retaliatory tariffs, and maybe we have to reroute where we buy things. And, in the end, it seemed like after all of this, it didn't really change much in the trade deficit anyways. It just continued the trend that we had, which was more towards services and away from manufacturing.
We're going to hear a lot about this next week, probably on the State of the Union address from the president, because I think they inherited a mess, no question about it, from the Biden administration, and this year is going to be a reset. So the question is, are we going to approach economic policy a la carte? Are we going to say, I love what you're doing with energy. I love what you're doing on the border. I'm hesitant about tariffs. How do you get that message across politically when this is a time that you are on my team or you are against my team?
It's a tough one because the Democrats are pretty united against the Trump administration. And now you are seeing this fight on the right where he's losing a lot because of things like this that I think had been traditionally, we're free market. You now see, I think it was the Reuters Ipsos poll has him in the 30s, is 38 to 60, I think. And so his numbers are really struggling, and it's going to be a tough thing going into the, an election year, the midterm elections, to see, can he make a good message? Can he rally everybody back together? Sure. Ben Shapiro, I saw, said maybe the best thing that could happen for him would be for the emergency justification for these tariffs to be, declared null by the Supreme Court. And in that case, maybe that would help him, because then the tariffs wouldn't
wouldn't be
on the table and discussed.
Interesting.
But I mean, we'll see what he says. But it's a fine line to walk to maybe start to appeal to some of the people that have grown cold to him.
Sure. So we're waiting on that decision, right? Is this an any day situation that the Supreme Court could rule on tariffs?
Yeah, I've lost count
track. Me too.
But I mean, it keeps getting pushed back, I think. But ultimately, is it an emergency something that, as Mitch was saying, it's actually seen as a good thing by a lot of economists to have a trade deficit means you're probably wealthier.
Right.
So is it an emergency to have something in place that I believe most of the time since World War II we've had a trade deficit as our economy's been growing. So in what sense is that emergency? I think the Supreme Court, I don't know why they're delaying the decision a little bit, but we'll see.
All right, I'm looking forward to that. We'll have coverage when that decision on tariffs does come down. You'll see it right there on Carolina Journal first. So let's talk about college polling sites. You had a great story on carolinajournal.com about what this means. There's been a lot of hubbub from universities. Some universities, not many, that say we want to make sure there's polling places on campus for the primary, which is just a few weeks away. What did you find out when you dug into this?
Right. So we're seeing more and more college campuses being used as voting sites for the primary, for the general election. And there's kind of some contention because there's a couple of factors that you want to look at when you're looking at voting sites. One is accessibility, not just to college students, but to the general public, cost effectiveness, and efficacy. Are they actually effective?
Right.
And so one of the reasons for using college campuses as voting sites is to increase young voter turnout, the younger demographic.
Yeah, of course.
And so the theory is that if it's closer to them, it's more accessible to them, they're more likely to vote. And so Chris Cooper, who's a professor of political science at Western University, said that between 2022 and 2026, they actually did see an increase in early voting sites on college campuses. And he said that's an increase from the last midterm primary.
Right.
So it's not as if they're becoming an endangered species. He said in some ways it's kind of the opposite.
Sure.
He said, no two sites are created equal.
So we aren't reducing college, because I thought from those protests that we were reducing, but we've seen an increase.
We've actually seen an increase
polling sites on campuses. Interesting.
Yes, but there are some, there's some factors to look at, which is like one is a general accessibility to the general public. Are they accessible? Not
Meaning,
just to college
can
students.
I show up, park somewhere, walk in, and get in?
And
interesting.
Parking is a great point. I'm glad you bring that up, Jonna, because Dr. Andy Jackson at the Civitas Center for Public Integrity here at the John Locke Foundation, that's one of the points that he brought up is there's not always parking available for the general public, enough parking. There's maybe very limited parking.
There's kids are getting towed constantly and getting tickets.
Exactly, yes. So that is a huge issue to look at when you're looking at accessibility to the general public.
Interesting.
And now they can be very cost effective because election boards often have to pay for these voting sites. But with college campuses, a lot of times the colleges will incur the cost of that.
Okay.
And they'll also incur the cost of rekeying the rooms, which has to be done for the security of the ballots.
Oh.
So they can be very cost effective, whereas some other places like a church that is often used as a voting site might not incur those costs. And so the Board of Elections does have to pay for that.
Okay.
So they can be very cost effective. But again, is it accessible to the general public? And are they actually being used by the younger voter demographic?
Yeah.
And so something that Dr. Andy Jackson noted is he says it's no accident that when NC State hosted an early voting site in the 2024 presidential primary, it was among the least used in Wake County.
Least used.
Yes. There was also a site at North Carolina A&T campus that was least used in Guilford County, the same primary despite being in Greensboro. And then during this primary that we're currently in early voting for, he says it's so far one of the least used sites in Wake County.
Interesting. So you think this is a difference in primary versus general election, or do you think that it's just that people can't get to it?
Yeah, I do think it's a difference between primary and general because they didn't necessarily have a lot of these college campus sites during the primaries. These are fairly active general election ones.
Right.
But the turnout for primaries is often much lower, and then I guess part of it is a lot of these sites can get kind of political in terms of which ones are you choosing. So if you look at just the list of who votes the most on which site, some of the least used ones often, as you're saying, are on campuses.
Right.
But like in Jackson County, you had Western Carolina University and also Qualla Boundary, which is the Native American Eastern Band of the Cherokee, use that. And those were kind of the two. I think they kind of had to decide, which one of these should we cut? And there's a little bit of politics involved, not just pure numbers, I think, because the Native Americans, I think the ones on the quality boundary that did vote in the primary, a lot of them did use that, even if it was a very low. So it seems some of it's like, do we want to encourage in certain demographics with college students or on the Native American, reservation to vote? So that comes into play as well.
Right. Interesting. All right. So I'm going to actually come right back to you. We're talking about demographic changes in North Carolina. We've been seeing this a lot lately. A lot of folks, we're like the third fastest growing state in the country, but I think behind Texas and maybe California, how many people are moving down here, big retiree place. Lots of students are coming here for education and then deciding to stay because right? It's just a great place to be. Both of you actually are relative transplants, right? So it is exciting. What are you seeing in our story on Carolina Journal, or opinion piece on carolinajournal.com, those big changes that are underway?
Yeah, we have a lot of people coming here, and so that growth rate is good. We have income is going up. Our unemployment rate is low. But I think part of the bigger picture problem is maybe we don't have enough workers. So people see the unemployment rate going down, and they're like, "Oh, that's great! It was 6%, and then it's 5%, and now it's
like 3.9.
3.9." But actually, a lot of economists will point out that 5% is actually full employment. That's really the healthiest point to have is 5.
Okay.
If you get too much under that, like 3.9, you're getting towards not enough workers.
Right.
Because the reason, almost, there's a ton of people, whoever needs work pretty much gets it immediately, and that's why that goes down. So why don't we have enough workers? Part of it that John Hood brought up is, the birth rate's gone down.
Right.
So we have an aging population relative to the people entering the workforce.
Sure.
So labor force participation rate is kind of going down to, it's like 59.
It is.
59%.
So normally it's about 61%, but now we're at 57%. And 59%. That's good. It is low.
So a lot of that is, there's all these people in the working age, and if they're kind of well distributed throughout, that number will be high. But if they're kind of a lot of people, they're in the working age demographic, but they're closer to retirement, fewer of them are going to be working. The biggest problem, I think, with this, obviously part of it is businesses can't find workers.
Yeah.
But maybe an even bigger problem could be entitlements, where we have people who want Social Security and Medicare that they've paid into their entire careers. But if you don't have enough working age people paying into the system, some countries like Japan or some in Europe who don't have very many, don't have a high birth rate, they're seeing a problem of we promised all these very generous retirement benefits and entitlement programs, and now there's not a lot of workers because we didn't have a lot of kids.
Right.
So, one of the ways that's dealt with often, and it causes some cultural problems, is mass immigration.
Sure.
So you need people paying into the system. You need workers. We didn't have enough kids. It does cause a lot of, now we're seeing people, we have to press 2 for Spanish or whatever, 2 for whatever it is. You have to, press 1 for English is what I meant. But, there's a lot of things culturally people start to see and kind of bristle against, but it's sort of a reality of how do we, and North Carolina is definitely seeing a lot of those things. When we had the ICE raids, and there's a lot of businesses that just can't find workers.
Sure. How big a factor do you think COVID was? We saw, with this reduction in work participation rate.
Yeah, I think it's a huge factor, especially in people that graduated from college during COVID. Because what I've seen is a lot of people that graduated during that time, they got used to working remotely, and so now they don't want to go into the office.
Interesting.
Which I think is fair if you don't have to be there. But there's also the reality of sometimes you just need to be there, or that's not that this is a good argument for it, but this is what generations of people have done.
Right.
Not to say that we should keep doing it that way because it's the way it's always been done, but there is an argument for sometimes you need to be there.
And sometimes there's work that can't be done remotely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like a lot of these labor jobs, which goes back to what you were saying about immigration, construction, agriculture. You brought up immigration earlier.
Biotech, yeah.
Yeah. Americans are not going to do a lot of these jobs, and immigrant workers will. Americans are not going to pick sweet potatoes. They're not going to pick tobacco. These are labor-heavy jobs, and Americans just aren't going to do them. Immigrants want to come here. They're willing to do these jobs, and so that's a great solution to the labor force here. And in agriculture, we're actually seeing a reduction, a labor shortage. Kelly Lester put out her report last fall on Harvest on Hold, which is all about the labor shortage in agriculture.
Right. Very interesting. Where do you think it's going from here? You think? I mean, it seems like it's only going to grow more.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem will get worse, but I do think we're in a fortunate spot that AI and robotics potentially, I'm not going to say I know it can solve some of this, but in terms of manufacturing, in terms of they actually, in agriculture, they have machines that can pull, so some of these labor things, there are manufacturing industries that their factories set up in a very robotic, automated way. And so it's potential that our output and our GDP can continue being sort of stable or even growing, even as we have fewer and fewer workers. But there might need to also be, I think there'll be increasing pressure on entitlements. I think neither parties wanted to look at it for a long time.
Sure.
And when Paul Ryan did, where did he go? He just, he was like the only one, we should look at this. And then they had the, throwing the granny off the cliff thing.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's a tough one that nobody wants to really look at.
Right.
But in the end, there's only so many ways that this can be solved.
Right.
And I don't think any of them people are going to be that happy with. Sure. Mass immigration, people aren't necessarily happy with. Everything being AI and robotics.
Well, and that's expensive. Yeah. So that really shuts out small farmers if you need to have big equipment to help harvest and all of those things. It really is. We're really at a critical point in the economy when we have that shift. Very
Absolutely.
Interesting. What are you hearing from folks who are in that industry? Where they anticipate this going?
Yeah, I mean, there are some young people that are looking to get back into the labor force. I just did that piece a couple of weeks ago on federal grants for apprenticeships in labor-intensive industries. So things like welding, agriculture, industries like that.
And they make more money now because it's so few of them.
Exactly, yeah. So there are some, younger people that do want to be in these trades, but a lot of them, like agriculture, like most young people do not want to, kind of take on their fathers or their families' like farms, and they're getting out of agriculture. They're not staying in it because it's such a hard industry and it's hard to even make ends meet, let alone make a profit.
Yeah. This is a national security issue to me. If we can't feed our people, how do we protect them?
Exactly. Yes.
Right. Very interesting.
Yeah, I think it was maybe NC Labor or they had a chart though of the ratio of people leaving an industry to joining, and manufacturing had the worst rate. Really? Meaning people, because it's so older, kind of heavy, weighted towards those who are older. Right. There's many more people retiring out of it than joining it because and the polling that comes out, younger people said they're not as interested in those professions because they do have to be on site, as you said, with remote work. A lot of them prefer, to be remote. And they also the more structured day where a lot of them said it seems like I'd have to be on my feet and on site from 9 to 5. Not interested.
That's so crazy to me. That is so crazy.
So they're trying to figure out ways to get people interested. Yeah. Maybe more money would help. But
I think social media is part of it. I think everybody is opening their phone and saying everybody else is making $1 gazillion on Instagram or, selling lip gloss or whatever. Everybody thinks that everybody else is making money doing this, and they're just not. There's a rude awakening when folks start paying their own rent and covering their own credit card bills because they think they're the only ones that are having to work. It's really strange.
And I don't think it's necessarily a problem if we move from a manufacturing and labor-heavy economy, and what we had been doing was moving towards services. And so, I mean, that could include a lot of things in tech. And if that's what naturally happens over time, there are a lot of well-paying jobs in those things. Yeah. But I think, there was more of an emphasis in Trump's administration in getting back to the real labor, jobs that are more tangible and things like that.
Right,
so,
working with your hands and with your mind. Yeah, it is really interesting. Speaking of working, spending, and all the adulting problems that we have, property tax. So we've been talking about this. The state legislature is really focused on that in this upcoming short legislative session. Both chambers, House and Senate, have launched committees to study property tax. If you feel like your property tax has gone through the roof, you are not alone. Lawmakers are saying we might have to do something about how fast communities, counties, cities, towns, whatever, can raise property tax rates, because in many cases, like we're seeing here in Wake County, folks who have had the same house for 50 years, it's paid off, can't afford to stay there because their property tax rates are growing. What are you seeing in this? We had a great article on CarolinaJournal.com. Do you think there's an appetite among lawmakers to do something about property taxes?
It seems like there might be. I think that they're being awakened to more of the problem. And one of the things that Representative Alan Chesser brings up is that he talks about the revenue neutral tax rate, which calculates the property tax each year for each county and adjusted for natural growth year over year. And so he says that anything that the county is instituting above that this is what he's arguing, is a choice to increase revenue, not a response to market conditions. And so it seems to me that this is very similar to what we saw with the reserve fund budgets.
Yeah.
So it's like you're inflating the budget, but you're making it look like you're keeping it the same by putting the money in a different pocket.
Interesting. So in many cases, they may be saying, hey, look, our housing rates are going up. Well, let's raise property taxes too. Do you think that that's some of what they're doing? They just see this as a cash cow in some cases?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is they don't have to touch the rate. So they can keep the rate at 62 cents per $100.
Right.
But then the state says every 8 years, you have to reevaluate all of the housing or the values, and so a house that was worth $100,000 now worth $300,000.
Right.
And so all of a sudden, people's rates didn't go up, but the amount they owe went up because of the revaluation. And so if you're these county commissioners, and all of a sudden, hey, we did the revaluation, and all of a sudden all this tax money comes in, new revenue, they don't really feel necessarily like they have to turn that down, or as Katie was saying, there's this push to maybe look at the revenue neutral amount, so it would actually be lowering the rate. So let's say everybody's values go way up.
Okay.
To keep everything neutral, the state says all the counties should publish what a revenue neutral rate would be, which for a lot of them would be lowering the cents per $100 from maybe 62 to 50.
Okay.
And so maybe to stay neutral, they'd actually have to drop the rate by a lot. But they haven't been doing that. They just kind of don't mention it. We'll just take a lot more revenue and keep the rate the same. So what he, I think, is proposing is to not only have the counties mandated to publish that rate of revenue neutral. What would it be? For most of them, it would be cutting the rate to keep the revenue neutral.
Right.
Not only do you have to do that, but if you want to have increase in revenue by even staying the same rate, then you would have to have public hearings. You'd even have to maybe have a referendum. So I think that's an interesting proposal because it's basically, if they were to keep the rate the same, that would be against the rules a lot of times because it would bring in too much revenue. But a lot of it too is, I think he says, it kind of lets them hide the costs.
He mentions a hidden tax hike.
Yeah, because I mean, in reality, if all these home values are going up, it's probably due to an increased population and to inflation. And so those same things will affect the county budgets.
Right.
But he just thinks that stuff should be more transparent. If the county's costs are going up due to inflation and more people moving there,
right,
and that's also what's making the housing go up, just discuss it more. Like, are we having more costs on? Why do you need this extra revenue without really discussing it with people?
Right, and this is part of that overall move for Republicans have been in charge at the General Assembly a little more than a decade now, and they are there because they said they would lower taxes, be more efficient in their spending, and lower the burden for taxpayers. This is part of that move, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's exactly right. So we could be seeing maybe with the upcoming short session, they might put forward a bill or take something up in regards to pushing this forward.
Sure. And there's certainly some budget pressure on education, rising healthcare costs, all of these things. So we're going to be covering all of this on CarolinaJournal.com. Let us know what you think. Where do you think those budget priorities should be? Are you paying too much in property tax? We want to hear from you. Keep this conversation going. Thanks so much for joining us on The Debrief, and we will see you again soon.